Good afternoon. I have personally looked forward very much to this session, and I welcome you all to the discussion around the future digital economy. I would like to start 25 years ago, in 1989, where two very significant events changed the world dramatically. First of all, we saw the Berlin Wall come down, and with that, an era of no more Cold War and an opportunity for business to globalize everywhere. And that same year, the World Wide Web was born out of an experiment in CERN, a need to manage documents, and with that, of course, a significant opportunity for change and transformation. Now, 25 years later, we have for the first time again seen some geopolitical challenges where some of the assumptions of unlimited globalization has been significantly challenged. Yet, on the technology side, we are seeing an increased pace of innovation and new opportunities. We have, in fact, over the last only 5 years or so, seen a radical disruption of certain industries, starting in the music industry. Any product that could be 100% digitized was digitized, and the consequences were quite significant for those companies that were in those industries. In many ways, you could argue also for the better, more efficiency in reaching customers, and in efficiency in supply chains. Now, we believe that we've only seen the beginning of this transformation. And it is in sharp contrast to the geopolitical challenges that we're seeing. So today we'll talk about what is needed in ensuring a thriving, open, and secure digital economy, a global digital economy. And I am, for a change here on the panel, asking the question, because this is a rather easy question to ask, but not so easy to answer. We have a distinct panel, and I'm proud to introduce our four panelists very briefly. They namely don't need long introductions. Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook, member of the board, but also member of the board of a number of companies and institutions, including Walt Disney. Welcome. Eric Schmidt joined Google 2001, executive chairman of Google, and also, I must say, the co-chair of Davos this year and a long supporter of the World Economic Forum. Thank you for that, Eric. We have Satya Nadella. He is the CEO of Microsoft. Joined Microsoft many years ago, 1992. Yet took over the leadership role approximately a year ago. Lots of change at Microsoft since then. And I must say, a significant launch yesterday of Windows 10. So we're very pleased that you made it here. Thank you. And Vittorio, Colao, CEO, Vodafone, joined Vodafone 2008. And Vodafone being one of the few true global players in the infrastructure needed to support this digital economy. We had a session earlier with Merkel where someone talked about the plumbing. I think we agreed on the highway for the digital economy. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to open this discussion with a brief introduction by each of the panelists on the vision for the future. What is your vision for the future state of the digital economy? And are you, generally spoken, optimistic or pessimistic about that future, and why? And Vittorio, would you start that?
Let me take it in reverse order. I am absolutely optimistic because I see a movie in front of me, and I know the end of the movie, and I see in the 30 to 50 countries where we operate in a little bit where the story is today, and I can tell you the story is absolutely at the beginning. It's just the beginning of a great story. And if you think that the movie is a movie of everybody connected with very low latency, very high speed, ultra dense connectivity available for objects and human. And you see where we are today, you say, you're really at the beginning of something amazing. What we are seeing is a complete change in the way people farm in Turkey, where we have the largest farmer club improving productivity, the way people manage their health, the way people are educated. 240,000 people in Egypt are educated through our technology, 60% of them women, by the way, which was not possible and probably not affordable until the beginning of the movie. Education of teachers, South Africa, inclusion. We talk a lot about mobile money in emerging markets. 1/3 of Kenya's GDP goes through payments. Finally, women have a secure, and the youth have a secure place where to store the money, and they can save time and increase productivity. And then you go into mature markets and energy savings and smart buildings and whatever, the beautiful thing that Google are working on. And I see the freeing up, not just of productivity and money, but also positive energy, which can really bring a more equal world. And so if you move the movie to the last scene, which is going to be, I don't know, 10 or 15 years from now, you can only be very optimistic. Now, it's going to be hard to get there, and we'll discuss how we get there.
Thank you very much. Satya?
I'm optimistic. There's no question. I mean, I think everyone in this panel, as people who are in the technology business, you have to be optimistic about what technology does. But the thing that I'm most grounded on is the role of technology. Ultimately, to me, it is about the human capital and the human potential. And technology empowers humans to do great things. And so you have to be optimistic about what technology can do in the hands of humans and how they exercise that. Now, I think the key issue, though, is there needs to be a new global consensus, which I think is what we will probably talk a lot about in this panel, that allows technology to progress and yet find that balance with what I would call legitimate interests that individuals have, societies and cultures have, and governments have. So I think that in order for us to truly see the benefits of technology, we need to get to that global consensus. And to your movie metaphor, that's where things can go wrong. And in order for us to have a happy ending, that's the discussion that we all need to have.
Thank you. Eric, are you as optimistic?
I think I'm the most optimistic of anyone you're going to find. And we've spent the last couple of decades here talking about the transition to all the world's knowledge, right? We now have basically available to us through many apps in many different ways, companies represented here in this room, et cetera, this enormous amount of information now. And new developments in machine intelligence will make us far, far smarter as a result. And this means everyone on the planet. The genetics revolution has a huge and positive impact on the way we'll treat disease, progression of disease, and so forth and so on. And it's all basically because these smartphones are really supercomputers, and everybody here has one. An interesting statistic is that on the order of 400 million people in the past year got a smartphone. And if you think that's a big deal, imagine the impact on that person in a developing world. And as a result, the globalization that this forum and that all of us believe in has produced ties that bind. It is no longer possible for a country to sort of step out of some basic assumptions in banking and in communications and in morals and in the way people communicate. You cannot isolate yourself anymore. It just doesn't work. So if I go forward, I imagine a whole new generation of technology and ideas. Think about a computer that gives you enormously personal, helpful advice. What should I do today? What am I interested in? Where should I go? How do I make these choices? Think about energy. We're all concerned about climate change and all those sorts of things. Much more efficient energy usage, a huge issue for the planet. Greater personal security for all sorts of ways and reasons. And think about learning and education with all the new tools that are being built. We're on the cusp of an acceleration of the level of impact of that, and it's almost overwhelmingly good.
Thank you very much. Any pessimism, Sheryl?
No, not for me. I want to answer the question with 3 stories. 2 brothers in Tamil Gang, India, lived in a village where you couldn't get to a hospital because there was no road, so people died. And so a couple of years ago, they built a Facebook page, they raised $100,000, and they built the People's Road to China with volunteers they recruited. Last year I was in Korea. I met a woman named Kayang. She had saved up to go to law school, but then she took her law school tuition, dropped out of law school, and built an app which would enable you to find same-day hotel rates. And she now employed 8 people and was starting to move out to other countries in Asia. And then just last month at Facebook, I met a woman who's become one of my heroes named Masi. And she started a Facebook page which now has 750,000 followers called My Stealthy Freedoms. And this page has pictures of women. They take themselves in Iran out in the open without headscarves, which is a punishable crime. And there's a photo on this page of a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. And the grandmother says, I wanted my granddaughter to feel the wind on her hair before it was gray. That's why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because these 3 stories happen in a world where only 40% of people have internet access. And if we can extend to more people, we increase voice. And importantly, it's not just them learning from us, it's us learning from them. It's us understanding Masi and the world she comes from. We increase economic opportunity, and we're going to talk about job creation. Technology is both a destroyer and a creator of jobs, but it really brings economic opportunity, like you see with the young woman in Korea. And we increase equality. Women are still much less likely to have internet access. Women are much less likely to get phones. Women are much less likely to get educated. And that's holding all of us back because we know that women invest in their children when they have access. And so I'm a huge optimist because if we can do all this with 40%, imagine what we can do when we get to 50, 60, 70, and hopefully everyone.
Oh, so there we are in a more concerned Davos than last year. Here's a panel of optimistic opportunity. It sounds like optimism for human beings, for society, for everyone. I think that's a good start. I'm also hearing some pretty significant change. So let's talk about the change first. And maybe coming back to you, Sheryl, Facebook has changed the way we interact with each other, no doubt. The term friend has a new meaning. Where do you see that going? Are we going to accelerate that pace? Are we becoming more old-fashioned? Where do you see the interaction between people going in terms of change?
I remember the old internet joke where you had the dog in front of the computer, and it said, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And that was because the internet was anonymity. No one would put their real name or face on the internet. And that really changed. It changed with social networking. It changed with Facebook. And I think that's really important because this is the historical shift from the historically powerful to the historically powerless because everyone has voice. If you think back to before the technologies that everyone up here deploys and develops, if you wanted to reach the world and you were not someone who had access, what would you do? Pass out flyers? Now everyone can post, everyone can share, and that gives voice to people who historically have not had it, and I think represents something truly profound in the world.
So you're saying it will reduce the divide, not increase the divide?
I think it does. I mean, certainly there are a lot of divides which are increasing, but if you look at the power of technology, and particularly social technology, it gives people voice, more equal voice than we've had before, and we've seen those impacts on the world.
Thank you. Satya, you represent not just the consumer side of things, but also business technology. I've been in the IT industry myself for 25 years, seen some pretty significant changes to the way you run business. Talk about that transformation.
Yeah, I mean, our core identity is all about providing the platforms and tools for others, both individuals and organizations, to take advantage of technology and transform themselves. So we have over 1 billion customers who use our productivity services, and we have over 100+ million businesses we deal with. And when you see what they're doing, it's very diverse. Just this week, in fact, there was this fantastic story. In fact, Eric was talking about machine intelligence. And the story I came across was someone who was a pig farmer in China is using machine learning to get much better at being able to produce things that can actually get to market and make them a profit. Now, who would have thought? And they're doing it with a simple app that's running on their phone, but they're using intelligence that's running on the cloud. You go to even come to Switzerland. There's a company in Switzerland that builds a banking solution, Terminos, which is a very successful company out of Switzerland. But the most fascinating thing is that they've been able to take that software, run it in the cloud, and get banks in Africa to be able to run these banks with literally no IT staff. So that means if you think about financial inclusion in Africa, which requires credit lending institutions and banks, the ability for something like that to start up is sort of come down in a pretty big way. You even take a set of volunteers, parents, their access to technology is increased to a point where type 1 diabetes children and their parents came together and built a cloud solution to be able to monitor children with type 1 diabetes wherever they are, instead of hovering around them when they're at games, so that they can get alerts when things need to be attended to. So that's the kind of diverse digital transformation that we are seeing, because one, the costs and the barriers have come down, and the ability for groups, small businesses in particular. One of the things that we did was a recent survey which shows that small businesses and their access to technology has never been better. And because of that, they are being more productive, and therefore they're being able to employ more and have high aspirations because of the markets being connected. And so that's the widespread and very diverse transformation I see.
So it looks like a significant opportunity for individuals, for businesses in all industries. I'm seeing that. Eric, Google has hired, you've doubled the amount of employees at Google since 2010, 50,000 approximately now. Are we as an industry creating jobs, or are we killing jobs faster than we are creating them?
Well, the question you're asking can be understood as sort of how does the labor market change as a result of all of this technology? Correct. And let's posit that the highly educated, the people who are driving this will all be fine. In other words, everybody in Davos and the Davos universe will be fine. What we're talking about is all of the people who are dispossessed by technological change. Now, this is not a new story. It's been true for hundreds of years, and there's no question there is dislocation. The core question is an economic one. Can you afford to stay behind in a technological or business opportunity, or does it make sense to become more efficient? All the laws of economics tell you that a globalized solution that is more efficient ultimately produces better wealth for everyone. And you solve the problem of inequality, which is a significant one, through progressive tax policies and so forth. Again, this is not news. So often the question is then asked, well, what happens to the person whose job is lost? Well, it's the same thing that happened when people stopped farming and started using tractors and so forth. They find new skills and new services. And so there's this enormous meme in the society where everyone assumes that this time it's different, that somehow the work that all of us are doing and all the people in the room are doing, is somehow no one's going to have a job in the world, and it's just going to be the Davos elite, and we're just going to have a good time, and everyone else is going to be rioting, or some stereotype like that. It's completely false, right? The correct answer is that everyone gets smarter because of this technology, because it's free or very inexpensive. And the empowerment of people is the secret to technological progress. Over and over again, it's been a transition from the elites. Remember, the elites were the only people who could read. Right? Now, then everyone could read. The elites were the only ones who were educated. Now everyone can be educated. The elites were the only ones who had entertainment. Now everyone has education. So we are all participating in this enormous transition where billions of people are joining our party, right? Joining our fun and joining our anxiety, right? They're all getting the same knowledge and activities and education. And if you get depressed, talk to the people that Sheryl talked about, or the people that I meet with, for whom the arrival of the smartphone is the most important thing in their life, perhaps besides that of a child. That's literally how dramatic a life change is for them.
So you're saying that, we've seen this kind of change before, it's just a repeat. I would challenge that in one sense, that when we went from agriculture to industrial age, it took 1 or 2 generations to get there. And hence we had enough time to kind of adjust. And with my experience in technology, the speed of which technology is driving change is at a very, very significant pace. So can we keep up with that pace, or is that a risk for this transformation?
Well, first place, there's no question, the basis of your question is correct, that things are happening more quickly, but we're also a wealthier globe, there are more people involved and so forth. But let's use the self-driving car, right? The original ideas were developed in the 1990s. The first self-driving car won the challenge in 2004, 10 years ago, right? They're just now, technologies inspired from that 20 years ago are beginning to become in cars, and most of you are not in those today, right? It takes much longer for these technological things to occur than people think about.
So there is hope. I have one concern, though, when you look at the world today, and I'm coming back to my introduction that, this assumption that the world is under kind of one system, there's no real tension anymore, and we can globalize as much as possible. Technology is, by definition, global. And yet, I think everyone is seeing an increased tendency to regionalization, even fragmentation, special rules. Talk a little bit about that, Vittorio. How does that look from an infrastructure point of view? You're one of the most global providers of infrastructure. You have a huge presence in India, which is a very different market to the European markets you're in, and Africa as well. How is that evolving, and can we avoid this fragmentation? What do we need to do to avoid that?
We must avoid fragmentation. The point, fragmentation would actually, if you go back to my movie thing, it means that you start slowing down frame by frame the movie, and you don't want to slow down because, as Eric said, this is the greatest opportunity that we have to really improve living conditions everywhere, and whatever, resource management everywhere. So we cannot allow fragmentation. Is fragmentation happening? Quite frankly, there is a temptation, and I think, if I'm honest, I think that we, including the people in this room today, we have very conflicting kind of feelings. When we talk about privacy, we think about something, but then when something like Paris happens, we think something else. The whole issue of how we will manage the richness of data, but also the potential dangers of data, is clearly creating very, very conflicting feelings in the population and therefore in policymakers. We should absolutely avoid the fragmentation of this fantastic connectivity that we are creating. And I think you, Satya, mentioned it before. That's where we need to try to find the right balance, as you correctly said, between different needs, and not try to be too ideological, but be very pragmatic. We need to respect jurisdictions. I'm not advocating for a second that jurisdictions should not be respected, because jurisdictions exist because people vote, and there are democracies in the world, not everywhere, unfortunately, but most of the times. But we should try to create harmonization. In Europe, there is a great opportunity, because we have something called European Union that should harmonize. And then between large blocks, again, we should harmonize, because otherwise we slow down the movie. And if we slow down the movie, we take away a lot of the benefit from essentially the less fortunate. Also from us, but also essentially from the less fortunate.
Talk a little bit about what you've done in countries where, let's say, the cost barrier is a different one than what we are seeing in the more developed world. How are you dealing with that? How are you making
Listen, I have a fantastic story about India. In India, there are areas where you look at all of your calculations, your things, and you say, this is not economic. And then guess what? We're now finding out that whenever we put a new tower in a place, within 8 months, the amount of data, 8 months, not 8 years or 2 years, the amount of data that goes through that tower is exactly the same of an area that before we have labeled as a good area. Why is that? You wouldn't believe, because people move from the edges of that area into the area in order to use data. So we need to change a little bit, the way we look at things. Change the equation. What is the cost to serve that I have to deliver in order to bring something to the country. Now, governments, policymakers have to play ball, because if, of course, they try to extract value, the reason why I use with Merkel this digital plumber thing, I prefer to call myself a digital plumber, because yes, there are people who build roads and highways, but sometimes there are people who are against roads and highways. Bring me somebody in the world who is against water pipes. Water pipes are life, we are life.
Eric, you had a comment.
If I could just support Vittorio on this, and I say this with almost complete seriousness, almost all of the problems we debate can be solved by literally more broadband connectivity in these countries. And the reason is that broadband is how you address the governance issues, the information issues, the education issues, the personal security issues, the human rights issues, the women's empowerment issues. Simple steps to make broadband occur, it's not a new message, in countries which are lagging are the key government and public policy thing that benefit the majority of the people. I'm quite convinced if you have a government program to get broadband broadly available through partnerships with Vittorio and other kind of countries, the citizens are clever enough, as you showed in India, and I have yet to find a country that doesn't have clever such people in it. They just don't exist. They're all clever enough. Just wire them up, and the citizens will take care of a lot.
But you've also visited North Korea recently.
Yes,
and
an unwired country.
Unwired. And we do see some tendencies that, with this availability of technology and access and information flow, things seem uncontrollable and quite scary for some countries, and they put different rules. What does that do to this development, the opportunity that we have at hand?
The internet is the greatest empowerment of citizens with respect to a government in many, many years, because all of a sudden the citizens have a voice. They can be heard. And we forget that millions of people live in countries where they have grievances or issues, and we haven't heard them because there's no functioning press, we can't talk to them, we can't hear from them. One of the greatest things about the internet is we're hearing those voices. And by the way, they have serious concerns. So in North Korea, the numbers, they're on the order of now 4 million internet connections, but they're all through data phones, and the data phones don't roam. So it's not possible to connect from there outside the internet, except through roughly 100 IP addresses. Internet use of the kind that we're used to is heavily supervised. A simple rule is if you're a college student, you have to use the internet with another college student who's watching you. Graduate students, by the way, can use the internet on their own, but you can assume that there's computers watching what they're doing. So it really is very much a surveillance of use. And that's ultimately not good for the country, and it's certainly not good for global safety.
But is there a risk that we get the fragmentation? And what happens? Satya, you've been trying to penetrate some countries. I heard a previous CEO from Microsoft say we have a high penetration in China, we're just not making any money. How do you see that evolving? And what are you doing to make technology, let's say, affordable to the billions of people?
Yeah, look, if I sort of step back and think about from our perspective as the technology industry, what are the three big issues that I think we need to tackle, and we have to tackle with the regulators, the governments, and also amongst ourselves? I would say there are three things. One is a discussion we had around, is the spoils of technology being evenly spread? That's because that's an issue that I think we have to tackle head on, and we've got to be able to talk, and Sheryl talked about the stories that really highlight that, yes, in fact, technology can impact a lot of people, and it's good for society overall. But that narrative has to be broadly understood and believed in. The second aspect is we've got to get this balance between privacy and, at the same time, use of data for legitimate public safety. I don't think any of us can sit here and deny the use of data in order to be able to have governments protect us. And then the last one, I would say, is this fragmentation issue. The internet is one of the greatest global goods and common good. And if we destroy it, we destroy a lot of our economic future. But yet, how do we get that balance where whatever is the cultural sensitivity, whatever is the local economic interest, how do we get to that next level of sophistication where we really avoid the real nightmare scenario of balkanization of the internet, but yet we have to accommodate for these legitimate interests. These are the three topics, I think, a forum like this can in fact facilitate great dialogue between all the constituents, and we need a global consensus. I don't think any set of us can make those rules, nor can a single government make that rule, because either one of those things will fail. And that's where I think we have to put our minds and energy to.
But let's stay with this challenge of the missing 5 billion people who don't have access. We have 2 billion people online, clearly a lot of disruption, a lot of opportunity, a lot of happy faces in what you can do. Facebook as an organization, from a business model point of view, is really based on the amount of people that come together on your platform. So you must be extremely interested in getting the remaining 5 billion people online.
We are, and I think at its heart, it's worth understanding that this is a cost problem. So World Bank puts global poverty at $1.25 a day. 1 in 6 people on the planet lives under that limit. If you're a connected average Facebook user, your implicit cost of data in the United States is $1 a day. So that means the developed world is spending in data what the developing world lives on. And so the only way we're going to make more data accessible and unleash all the potential that everyone here talked about is if it gets cheaper. And so everyone on the stage, I think, is working on it in their own way, and there have to be lots of different approaches to connect 60% more of the world. We have a project we call internet.org, which tries to provide free data in different places. We've launched 4 apps, and in about an hour, we're launching our 5th in Ghana. And what it does is it's an app that anyone can get that provides free Facebook, free Messenger, free Wikipedia, free access to UNICEF's Facts for Life, to other health and motherhood-based information, civil rights for women, pregnancy information, advice on healthy children. And what we've seen from our launches in other countries is that people have healthier babies because they can get basic information on what they should do during pregnancy or during early childcare. And women understand what their rights are, or people can look up information on Wikipedia. This isn't the whole answer, but it is a way of getting some people some data for free. And we think that's really important. And there have to be a whole number of other things. But fundamentally, the economics have to change to get the rest of the people online. Because as things are currently priced, they can't afford it.
So who's paying for this? Vittorio, are you going to provide the infrastructure for that for free? Or?
Actually, I would like Sheryl to say whether she's paying for the bandwidth or not. Because, of course, the concept is good. The issue is who pays for the investment and for the spectrum and for the infrastructure that is required for that. Now, if Facebook, in its own generosity, wants to donate part of your very large market cap into this is great. But that's your choice. I am more a fan of finding structural ways, not just commercial ways or promotional ways, which are very noble. I'm not saying they're not bad, but they're not the real, to reduce the cost of providing data into those situations. And therefore, again, examples like the one I made, we really need to work on different models, we work a lot with the infrastructure manufacturers to reduce the cost of energy, reduce the cost of backup. Solar is becoming an important source in many countries, to find ways also, quite frankly, to share this investment, especially in rural or very poor areas, like we do in India, for example, in order to make it sustainable in the long term. Free, to me, doesn't sound like sustainable in the long term.
Eric, you have a rather big investments in balloons and infrastructure. Talk about that.
What's interesting is that when you study the poorest countries, the most profitable part of the industries in those companies, often up to 10% of the GDP, are in fact the telecommunications companies who are operating at very, very low price points. So we do have proof that in the traditional telephony, not the smartphones, there are entrepreneurs and companies and so forth that have been able to figure out Vittorio's model. So I'm hopeful that we can do the same thing. For Google's contribution, we're working on a different technology to see if that works, and it's balloons which float around in the stratosphere. And they literally float about 100 miles, roughly 100 miles an hour, sort of, in the direction of the wind at that level. And working with the local telecommunications provider, they'll actually provide an LTE signal to a very remote person. So a simple rule of how you get broadband everywhere, which is sort of my underlying religion, is your first choice would always be a fiber optic connection, ideally directly to your home. And in the advanced economies, people have that. Your second choice would be using various forms of wireless because the government is busy selling that off to you, and they shouldn't do that. They should just give it to the telecom operators because it's such a public good. And then the third would be using technologies for very rural areas to reach them, satellite, balloons, and others. The combination of the sum of them provides a communications web of enormous value to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think just adding on to Eric's piece, I think the thing that's fantastic is, even amongst the panelists here, there's absolute consensus that low-cost bandwidth is a must for economic development to reach everyone. In fact, if you want to solve inequity issues and give opportunities to everyone, let's start by getting that infrastructure. And all of these various technologies, I mean, you talked about the balloons, one of the technologies that we have been pioneering. And by the way, there's no one solution here. We would want all of these, in fact, to play in that roadmap you described. And the technology that we are very interested in is white space. How do we use the TV white space more effectively? And in fact, we've done a bunch of radio work to reduce the interference so that you can, in fact, in Ghana, use TV white space. We are partnering with a local ISP to provide now a rural internet service. And the sustainability comes because now this local ISP has a low-cost service that they're doing. And to your point about having a model which is sustainable, that's the way we're going to create markets for people to get access. And so that's, I think, key to how we have to have innovation, and then innovation needs to be brought to market, and the regulators have to play a role, the local entrepreneurs have to play a role, and then at the end result is people with smartphones have great access to services.
And you should say, by the way, that the white space is the space between the channels that you never see.
That's right.
Vittorio.
I would like to say, a thing which will bring a bit of credit to about my joke about the generosity of Facebook. We really have to be grateful for companies like the ones that are here, because I have to tell you, balloons. If I'm honest, when I got the phone call from Google saying, tomorrow morning we are announcing that we do the balloons, and my reply was, Nikesh, who was then working for Google, what did you smoke? I mean, balloons? So here you're talking, you're talking about the largest European or one of the largest in the world telecommunication company. I really thought it was crazy. Believe it or not, we're now working with them, and we think they actually might work. So back to this balance and this good cooperation between governments, I think technology companies like these three are doing a lot of great things for the world. We need to incorporate their ability to deploy, and then my poor, humble plumbing, together with governments to let them understand what the opportunity is in front of us, what nice hand this movie can have. And this is the big challenge, because of course you're talking about very complicated, and your white space thing is just one example. Sure. But it's great.
And it goes to where you started on the panel, which is, are you a pessimist or an optimist? If you are an optimist, and the technology industry are long optimists, you believe that connectivity will give people voice, that this will work out, that we're going to try a lot of things and fail. The technology industry is also one that's willing to try different approaches that don't work, but that fundamentally we will succeed and people's lives will be better. And I think we believe that, and that doesn't mean there aren't challenges, but there are also opportunities. And I think the opportunity we all have, working together in different ways and competing in other ways, is to find ways for technology to make everyone's life better, not just the people who are well educated and can code. And I think that's a really important point. When we think about what's happening in the global economy, everyone's worried about jobs, and they should be, right? So much technological change. Your point that it's happening way faster, the transitions Eric spoke about are happening faster than ever before, all of that is true. But at the same time, technology creates jobs, not just in the technological space, but in the non-tech world. So, when I was in India, these two women are fashion students at the Bangalore Fashion Design. They started a company that makes hair accessories They make hair accessories and sell them through Facebook. They employ 3 other women who were previously unemployed. None of them are coding. None of them have the education to code. The women they employ don't have education at all, really. But they've created these hair accessory manufacturing jobs in Bangalore, India, because they can take advantage of technology. And I think all of us are big believers in entrepreneurialism. So think about what it used to take to start a business. You had to get a storefront, get a loan, right? Have an office, or build a website, which is expensive. And now, because of technology supplied by everyone on this stage, as well as so many people here in this room and at WEF, you can do that with very low cost. Distribution, marketing, an ability to sell your products and services, those costs are decreasing. And that makes the ability to start companies and create jobs available to everyone.
Yes, Eric?
Just to support the numbers, that all of our companies have lots of numbers, which we can talk about the scale of this. There are many of estimates that each tech job generates 5 to 7 non-tech jobs that come with it. You remember all those numbers. We have all sorts of GDP growth that correlate these with higher GDP growth in countries. There are estimates that if there were a single digital market in Europe, which is very high priority for all of us, it would create up to 4 million new and important jobs in Europe.
Well, let's exploit this, because there's no doubt that through the opportunity you all talk about and the acceleration that's happening, we've seen tremendous value being created. I compare market cap of top 10 companies 10 years ago and now. A lot of that value went to IT companies. Are we at a stage where if you're not an IT company, there is no future? And the second part of that question is this a winner takes it all kind of game? Because the nature of what you need to do in terms of technology and platform means that it can only be one, otherwise it won't work. How do you see that? Maybe Vittorio, you start on that.
Well, you're really raising a question on possibility to continue to innovate if dominance is established. These activities are intrinsically stronger if they have scale, and scale brings monopolies. Can we afford to have monopolies? I would say no, we shouldn't. And I think dominance is another big issue that of the 4, I'm the one who probably doesn't have that problem, but we have at some point to face. Now, dominance is not necessarily bad. So you could be a benign dominant player, but of course, back to the point of who will be the judge, who will decide, that's another key point in the movie that at some point will have to be addressed. And again, I say it more in the sense of let's make sure that wrong decisions are avoided, that in order to fix problems, regulators or policymakers can overreact. But I think if we really want to help the entrepreneurs that Sheryl was talking about, or other entrepreneurs, to continue to innovate, to continue to have the dream, one day I will beat Google, one day I will beat Facebook, dominance should be taken out as a possibility. So yes, there will be also that angle of the story that has to be looked at.
Eric, how do you see that? I mean, it's hard to have too many search engines, in fact, and yet there is a dominance challenge here. How do you see that?
Well, first place, you asked a question about the IT companies versus everybody else. Yes. And I think the evidence is that the winners in every market will be the ones that use software and machine intelligence most effectively to solve customer problems better. And I think you're going to see this, you clearly see this in banking, that's been true for a long time. You see it in financial services for a long time. But I think you're going to see it in many, many other industries that have not yet seen the benefits of the software revolution. And the software revolution, which is, by the way, a much larger industry than what you think of as the IT industry, it's all the people in these companies trying to make the delivery of trucks and goods and services and so forth better priced, more efficient, more individual. And we haven't even talked about the scale of healthcare and that sort of thing. So if you think of software, the use of software, which all of us try very hard to get into these companies in one way, it is the transformation because it makes the company smarter, the executives smarter, the salespeople smarter. It allows you to manage your businesses more efficiently. If you're not using it, you're going to lose to somebody who is, and that's sort of where we are. And that's going to be true for another decade, for sure, maybe two. On the question of dominance, you now see so many strong tech platforms coming, and you're seeing a reordering and a future reordering of dominance or leaders or whatever term you want to use because of the rise of the app on the smartphone. And I think all bets are off at this point as to what the smartphone app infrastructure is going to look like. You have a whole new set of players who are taking this new platform, which, as I described, is essentially, you think of this as a phone, but it's really a supercomputer. And all of us spend a great deal of time thinking about what are the apps that people are going to use, how are they going to solve the problem, are we entering? And I view that as a completely open market at this point.
Now the benefit of platforms, if you turn it around, is that it fosters potentially an enormous ecosystem of others who don't have to build the fundamentals but can build on top of. Microsoft has a strategy like that for many years. How will that evolve? Will more innovation happen outside of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big advantage of platforms, they are generative in nature, in the sense that you create a platform so that others can, in fact, build on top of without having to bear the expense that they otherwise would have. That leverage doesn't come without some scale. And I think Vittorio talked eloquently about what it means to have checks and balances on dominance. But technology evolution itself, as Eric was saying, can also take care of it as paradigm shift, the dominance position shift. But the core thing that is needed in order for broad participation. See, one of the things for me is whenever I visit a country, I make it a point to go visit the partners locally that are betting on our platform. Because to me, that's lifeblood. Because our entire economic model is based on the ability to have lots of local partners who are doing things in healthcare or in banking or in energy or in any sector on top of our platform. And that's true for all of us in different forms. And so as a platform provider, you need to make sure that the economics of the platform are not all one-sided and that there is enough out there to be able to create a generative platform. Otherwise, I think it'll collapse on its own sort of weight.
Sure.
I think one thing that underlies all of this, which I know so many people here deeply care about, is also equal access and opportunity. So it's worth remembering that women are much less likely to be educated. Women are much less likely to get phones. They are much less likely to be able to use their phones. And actually, the benefits of getting women connected, often, not always, but often, outweigh the benefits of men getting connected because they will put those investments back into the education and healthcare of their children. So for example, whenever we provide data, making sure however we do it, because there are a lot of different approaches here, that we actually give information to women on what their rights are or how they get help for a sick child. When you think about what's going to happen, some of the evolutions Eric talked about, all of this is only possible if we really make sure that women get access at the same rate as men. And it's worth understanding that the world is not on that path. 17 countries of hundreds are run by women. 5% of the top jobs in almost any country in the world, regardless of their legal structures, around women. And particularly as we look at basic education and access to data, unless we intervene, we means this community of everyone here, women will not get the same opportunities to participate in these platforms, participate in this growth as men. And so it's something that I think takes an active and a different role than we've had before.
I think that is a splendid segue into taking a few questions from the audience, the ecosystem of these leading technology companies with a very strong tendency for optimistic views and solutions to the challenges that we're facing. Please, anyone. There's a question down there. And could I please ask you to present yourself and also direct your question to one of the panelists.
Stu Eisenstadt. One thing that was not asked or addressed is the misuse of the internet by terrorist groups, criminal gangs, cyber attacks. the ability of terrorist groups to organize and finance using the internet, and then the government's demand, which you've all faced, in a way of combating that, to try to get information from you that may compromise your own customers' privacy. Could you discuss those range of issues?
Vittorio?
Yeah, you raise a point which is, of course, very true. Bad people use the internet, not just good people. And, of course, society needs to be sure that you can defend. Now, the question is, what is the appropriate way for a government, for any government, to make sure that they protect their own citizens without going beyond what is appropriate and commensurate to the threat? And again, in the telecom sector, we've been used to this since, when I was young. The issue is to have a very clear, and I would want to use the word transparent, way of how you do it. For example, we were the first European operator publishing a transparency report in which we declare to our customers exactly what we do in every country, comma, where we are authorized to describe what we do, comma, and where we are not, we said why. So I think transparency is very important. There's no doubt that governments have the duty to protect their own citizens, and there's no doubt that bad people are using the internet, but it should not be a license to do everything, because again, there is a balance that has to be reached between the two different needs.
We have one more question. There was one in the back as well. Red shirt.
Yeah, hello. My name is Atuol Zanapia. I'm a global shaper from Accra. I used to work at Google too, so it's really nice to see you, Eric. I'm also really proud that Sheryl mentioned the internet.org program happening in Ghana, and I know about the Koforidua White Spaces project as well. I've used the internet a lot, and I'm really championing the use of it in Ghana as well. And I just wanted to pose a question to all of you around mobile internet, around especially sub-Saharan Africa. So many people are using phones, and I think the interesting thing is that there are a lot of people using the internet for Facebook and for a lot of communication. How can we get to the point, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where we are doing much more than just messaging, but actual e-commerce, running businesses off the internet? What are some of the things that you can share to help us really do that? Thank you.
Eric?
I think each of us can contribute a little bit to this. The core problem in Africa has been its geographic bandwidth isolation. For a long time, there was only one cable on the left side of Africa. Now there are multiple cables. There have been problems inside of Africa where the central countries, think of them as like Uganda and so forth, only had satellite access, which is particularly slow and particularly expensive. Many companies, including those represented here, have helped fund the necessary connectivity to get to the cities. So a reasonable expectation is that if you're in one of the larger cities in Africa, you will have reasonably good 4G LTE connectivity from the local providers, including in many cases Vittorio's operations. And I think that's a good start. Second problem has been language. Much of the content is not in the local languages, and we have funded and others have funded projects to put that. That's relatively straightforward once people get connected. The third has been payment systems. And I think if you look at the success of M-Pesa in Kenya, you mentioned some others, there's a whole bunch of e-commerce, and it sure looks like banking is going to be done over the internet. So the combination of content and banking is probably enough, at least in the cities, to break the logjam.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question down here. Go ahead.
Khaled Letaya from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. I'm just going to have a quick question about the evolution of the internet. We know that the internet started with just, then we talked about the mobile internet, and now witnessing the Internet of Things. Where do you see actually the evolution of the internet, especially in the context of 5G as we move forward?
I mean, I think I can start, and this is a topic that we can talk for a long time, but one of the things that I do believe, if you take even 5G in particular, it's the adaptive way that we will use bandwidth. I think that's perhaps one of the most breakthrough things that'll happen for us. Because as we sort of get very, very comfortable with any given level of bandwidth, we come up with ways to consume more. And in fact, one of the technologies that I'm very, very excited about is what does it mean to redefine even what mobility means? And today's form factor, of course, is the phone. And that's done a fantastic job of democratizing access, and all the stories you heard today were about how it's really enabling all this inclusion. What's the next metaphor or next paradigm that's in fact going to be more pervasive? Internet of Things is what people talk about. You know, there's different type of battery needs, different type of connectivity needs, and that makes computing ubiquitous and intelligence ambient. And so what is the evolution in the bandwidth and also the cost of bandwidth that allows us to truly get to ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence is at least what I see as the future of the internet.
I would answer very simply that the internet will disappear. Yeah. The internet will be, there'll be so many IP addresses because of IPv6, so many devices, sensors, things that you're wearing, things that you're interacting with, that you won't even sense it. It'll be part of your presence all the time. Imagine you walk into a room and the room is dynamic, right? And you, again, with your permission and all of that, you're interacting with the things going on in the room. A highly personalized, highly interactive, and very, very interesting world emerges because of the disappearance of the internet.
If I may, I completely agree with Eric. To me, the biggest question, also in relation to the spectrum utilization, the bigger question, which I will leave it as a Davos question, is, will we really, in the future, continue to license spectrum? Do governments license oxygen? No. They tax the profit of us, or the income of us, human beings, who breathe oxygen. Does it make sense? Will it be possible in an ultra-dense connectivity situation to distinguish which spectrum is licensed, which spectrum is not, and who has the right to use what? Again, question that probably I will not see because it's a very long time, but it's oxygen, it's water, it's these type of things.
So I think we are coming to an end of this. It's clear that the internet will be like oxygen, needed by everyone. In order to come to a final close in terms of action, would love to ask just a brief comment from every panelist as a closing remark. What is the problem that your company will work most on, and what do you need from someone else in order to accelerate us to that digital global future?
In one word?
In one word, if you can.
Trust.
Trust.
Re-establishing a positive, constructive trust environment between technology providers, governments, plumbers, and customers, so that we are really defining in a harmonious way the next frames of the movie.
Satya?
And I would say global consensus. It cannot be left to any one company or any one government. There needs to be a global consensus on establishing that trust.
Eric?
I agree with that. We need governments to do one very important thing, which is to help build and license this infrastructure to make this incredible future happen as quickly as possible.
And Sheryl, I would have loved a question from a woman, but I will end with the voice of a woman.
Inclusion. Inclusion. An internet that connects everyone, that's accessible to everyone. 60% of the internet today is in English. If that does not make it clear how uninclusive it is right now, nothing does. We need voices, technologists, entrepreneurs of all types to reflect the diversity that is the world, so that the voices can be heard. And I think we can create a more connected and a safer world.
I think those are the best words we could end this session. The last 25 years have created significant change. I think today's panel talked about the next 25 years being even more significant, but with an optimistic tone, and I felt a strong commitment to make sure that that digital world can happen in a trusted, global, and inclusive way. Thank you very much.